Welcome to the Building Great Marriages podcast. My name is David Feldman, and today we are going to be speaking about how weak men create masculine women. The first thing we're going to be discussing is this really true? Do weak men create masculine women? It's a very common theme. We see this on Twitter, we see this on TikTok, we see this on YouTube. Typically, women either defending their choices or bemoaning their situation are quick to claim that the reason so many women are behaving in traditionally masculine ways is because men don't, right? Because men aren't taking charge, so women have to, right? And this seems intuitively correct, meaning is if men aren't the ones stepping up to the plate, then women are forced to do so. And that makes sense, right? Because men don't provide, women have to, right? Because men aren't doing what's necessary inside the home, so women have to. And this leaves many women, especially if you're looking on TikTok or Twitter or YouTube. I'm not a big Instagram guy, so I'm sure it's there too. But it leaves many women feeling exhausted and frustrated, right? Because they feel like so much of the burden of life is on their shoulders. And they feel like it's not fair. And oftentimes, this creates such a problem that it leaves women lonely as well, because if the dynamic is continued long enough, it creates conflict and anger in the marriage and the relationship, and eventually threatens the marriage and can lead to divorce, right? And this makes sense, because why should a woman take on a man if she feels that that man isn't contributing anything to the home? If she feels that she could do a better job of running everything if she's on her own, right? If she feels she can't be feminine because she's forced to act like a boss all the time, not only over herself and not only over her perhaps coworkers, but when she comes back to the house, she feels like she has to boss around her husband or boss around or take full responsibility for everything happening, whether it's with the kids or with the home or paying the bills or even making the money, right? So many women cry out in frustration that it's because the men are weak that she's forced to be masculine. This also occurs, this trope is also stated when we see a lot of podcasts like the Whatever podcast or Fresh and Fit podcast or many even more mainstream podcasts, which discuss how women today appear to be so bossy and so controlling, right? So many women defend themselves and say, well, I wouldn't be this way if you weren't such a wimp when it came to leading in the home. Meaning, I'm forced to take on the more aggressive role because you're not providing and protecting properly. So the question is, is this really true? You know, is this actually happening? First of all, do weak men create masculine women? That's number one. And is it because men are weak that women are behaving masculine? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe because women are behaving in a more masculine way, men choose to take the back seat, right? Maybe it's the opposite. And also, can women really behave in a masculine way? Is that possible? I mean, I understand that today gender can be fluid, but putting that whole discussion aside, do women actually act masculine? Or can we say that the way women are acting is an expression of stressed out femininity, which is actually the way I see it? But first, let's examine which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it that the men are showing up weakly and therefore the women are being masculine? Or is it that women are coming into the relationship with very dominant personalities, very strong needs and desires, a very strong sense of direction and need for control? And what this is doing to the men in their lives is encouraging them to check out of the leadership position. So let's take a step back for a second and take a look at our own personalities, right? When we enter in a relationship, we find ourselves with obviously another person that has a completely different way of interpersonal communication and relationships. Basically, each person has their own personality type. And oftentimes we'll find ourselves matching with somebody whose personality type is very different than our own, right? It's very common that somebody who's extroverted will match up with somebody who's more introverted. Some of us are great communicators, while some of us are more shy. Some of us are very emotionally available. That tends to be the women, but it can go both ways. Whereas some of us are a little bit more stoic. This is natural and normal and just part of the process of two people getting to know each other, living together, and being raised in separate environments and homes and having their own base personality, right? Very normal. But in addition to our personality differences, we also, as men and women, have inbred personality character types, which in general are true across the board. So, for instance, as Jordan Peterson likes to point out a lot on his podcasts, especially when it comes to women in the workforce and asking for raises, men tend to be more aggressive, whereas women tend to be more passive and agreeable. This is just a general characteristic between men and women. And it's men tend to be bigger thinkers, right? More abstract thinking, maybe perhaps a little bit more logical and rational thinking, whereas women tend to be more emotionally intelligent as well as more detail oriented. These are general differences between men and women, which are, in spite of whatever personality type you have, are true in general between us. One of the areas which is germane to this conversation regards leadership, right? It is fairly obvious that men tend to be leaders, right? Men tend to have more capacity to fall into leadership roles, right? This is true whether you're in America or whether you're in the Far East or whether you're in the Middle East or whether you're in Europe. Even in the most egalitarian societies, men tend to take on more leadership roles, whereas women tend to take on more nurturing and supporting roles. It's just part of the nature of the differences between masculinity and femininity. So that's why there is this famous phrase, behind every successful man is a dedicated woman and a loyal woman. I don't think we say behind every successful woman is a man. If anything, most successful women will say they achieve their success in spite of not having a man, right? So if this is the case, and men in general tend to be more leadership oriented, then what happened? How is it that it came to be that so many women are complaining that men are failing in leading their homes, right? And that seems to be, once we walk through the front door of our house, the roles are reversed. I tweeted out a great story the other day of one of my clients, which I'll share now, which is that I'm familiar, one of my clients, complains to me that when he gets home, he feels like he's henpecked. So we discussed, his life in general and who he is as a person. And it comes out that he happens to be a fantastic leader at work. He has an executive position and he has many employees underneath him. He was awarded manager of the year many times. His division is profitable. He is successful. He's a successful leader. And this isn't just at work. When he goes to his church, he's one of the, pillars of the community. He organizes fundraisers and he's involved in policy making and he takes on responsibility. So if things go wrong or if if the people are having a difficult time, they have a complaint, they always know who to call. He also does so on his hobbies, which is what I tweeted out about, is that he's a biking enthusiast. So every Sunday morning he gets on his bike with the funny clothes and he with a group of bikers where they spend the day uh, biking across the city. And not only does he lead that group, but he arranges the actual route and he scouts it out in advance and he makes sure that there's safety protocols and he brings extra equipment for all the people and he makes sure that there's bathrooms along the way and he makes reservations at a restaurant for when they're finished. They can all have, breakfast or coffee, whatever it is that they do. The guy is a natural born leader. I mean, he has hundreds of people in all these different areas of his life that depend on him and rely on him. But when he walks in the front door of his house, he feels that he can't do anything right. He feels that his wife doesn't give him even a modicum of a responsibility and seems to take away from him his natural leadership position there, because she either feels he's not doing it right or he's not doing it the way she wants him to do it, right? And eventually what he did, and I asked him about this, I said, well, why aren't you showing up as a leader at home? He explained to me, he says, I just got tired of fighting with her. Is exhausting. It was more exhausting trying to regain my leadership position in the home and offer my qualities as a leader to my wife than it was just letting go. It was much easier that way. And he still is a leader with his kids, right? He still is a leader with his in-laws. He's still a leader with his parents. But with his wife, when it comes to anything having to do between him and her, he just lets go because he doesn't want to fight. It's not worth it. He doesn't have that much time to spend with her. And the time that he does want to spend with her, he doesn't want it to be a battle. For her part, when I'm speaking with her, she's frustrated. She feels like all the responsibility is on her shoulders, that she has to do everything, that if she doesn't tell him what to do, he's just not going to do it. To her, this idea that her husband is a leader in all these different aspects of life is a fantasy land, is just a dream. It can't be true. Right? So my work with the couple really focused more on helping her let go. We talked a lot about what her issues were, and a lot of it came from an insecure childhood, right? Where she didn't have good role models as parents, and she didn't experience a lot of security, whether it was emotional security or financial security. She went through a lot as a kid, and she brought a lot of that anxiety and fear into her current relationship. And so she always felt the need to be in control. If she wasn't controlling the narrative, if she wasn't controlling when the bills are being paid, how the kids are being educated, how the housework is being done, when to take vacations and where to go, how to even walk through the security lines in the airports, if she wasn't in control, it felt like the situation was out of control, right? Which was really sad for her because she suffered. She felt exhausted. She felt mentally and emotionally checked out. And this was affecting her relationship with her husband, where she started not even seeing the good in him and disconnecting with him physically. I mean, who wants to make love to somebody who, in your mind, you feel is another child to take care of? So I worked with her on this and I helped her learn to let go in certain areas and give over the responsibility to her husband and to see what would happen. Right. And she was amazed. She flabbergasted that when she decided to let go, this is the big one that we were talking about, when she allowed her husband to be in charge of getting the tickets to the winter break and to take the kids to the airport and her arrange the taxi and get there on time and walk them through security and make sure they all had the right seats and pay for everything that needed to be paid for. She was astonished that her husband was able to do this, which for him was like a no big deal. But for her, it was like a huge breakthrough. And slowly but surely, she started letting go more and more in areas that were appropriate for her to give over to him, whether it was paying the bills or making sure there was enough money in the bank accounts or saving up for retirement and managing those investments. for his part, he was happy to do it. He never had an issue with this from the very beginning. He just always felt under her scrutiny so strongly that it started affecting his relationship. So he let go. But for her part, this was a huge breakthrough in their relationship, right? So I'm not convinced that weak men create masculine women. I happen to believe that the reason why we show up in this way, which in my opinion is a bit of a distortion, is in large part because of the way we're raised, right? And the personal problems that we come to the relationship with. Right? Men are naturally born leaders. And even though on day one of the marriage, he may not be this fantastic leader, but it's something which he has inside of him and can be cultivated and elevated, as the example of this man. This man was an older, middle-aged person, and I'm not saying that he was the same guy when he was 21, but now at 38, he's a fantastic leader. Again, not at home, but in the rest of his life, he's a fantastic leader, successful businessman, successful community member, successful hobbyist, a cycler, successful with his kids. His kids look up to him and think he's a great dad and have learned the world from him. So I felt that this woman, unless she looked inwards a little bit, was never going to experience the benefits of having a leader in her family. She was always going to feel that if she wasn't in control, it was out of control. So how does this happen? Right? So let's get a little deeper here. In today's day and age, most of us have grown up with all of us have grown up with some level of dysfunction, some of us more than others. Unfortunately, there are those of us who grew up in single parent households where there was not a lot of stability. And we didn't see a great dynamic between our parents, right? And maybe there was some financial hardship, right? Maybe we saw a divorce, right? And these growing pains, these traumas that we experience when we're kids can form our personality types where we're a little bit distorted, where we have lost trust in others, right? And women will typically experience this harder than men because a woman's number one desire is for security, right? When she grows up in an environment where there's lacking security, that is exactly the energy she's going to bring to her relationship. And it's going to be a lot about her and less about her husband, right? And in another area that I'd like to discuss this as well has to do with our faith. Many of us have very weak relationships with God. And we look at the world as if anything can happen at any time, which is true. That is true. Anything can happen to anybody at any time. I'm totally with you on that. However, there is this concept of divine providence and faith. And for many who do believe in God and do have a relationship with God and do believe that God only works in our best interests, as difficult as that may feel or may be to believe at times. So if we have that backbone, then we can lean into our faith and feel a sense of security. For many of us who grew up without any of that, it's very difficult because the world seems like just like a random set of events that anything can happen at any time for no real reason. And therefore that itself breeds also a lot of insecurity. So yeah, it's multiple facets of how we got here, right? And I think that we all bring our childhood development and our childhood wounds to our relationship. So it can even happen on the masculine side. A man can grow up in a house where he sees his father always placating his wife, his mother. And maybe the son also felt like the only way to make his mother happy was to say, yes, mom, yes, mom, yes, mom. And he's going to bring that energy to his wife, and she's going to turn to him and look at him and say, hey, I need you to say no every once in a while. I need you to take charge, right? So the important thing is that for us to understand that there are some natural roles in traditional marriages, in traditional relationships, that we could strive to embody. So for men who find it difficult to step up to the plate and take leadership, right, we need to work on that. We need to learn to be more aggressive in taking control of situations, right? Whether it comes to family planning in terms of finances, or where and how are we going to educate our children, or what's going on with our children, right? How are we going to bring religion into our home? What's that going to look like? What church are we going to go to? What synagogue are we going to pray at? What's going to be a level of observance for the family? What schools are we going to send our kids to? Today, that's a huge question. In my generation, it was easy, public school, but today it's a big problem. What's going to be our policy on screen time for our children, and even in the home between you and your wife, right? So there's so many areas that we can, as men, step up into and show leadership. And what this does is it takes the burden off of our wives from having to make these choices and decisions because we are choosing not to. And on the women's side, it's important to let go a little bit more. And without great fanfare, well, I'm going to see how you do, right? I'm going to give this over to you because that sounds like you're a teacher or something. But without great fanfare, moving over responsibilities to your husband, right? Practice going on a trip and not saying anything about almost anything. Are we going to get to the airport in time? Did you get the Uber? How much are the tickets costing? Did you make the reservations for the hotel? Let your husband know in advance that you're leaving everything up to him. You trust him. That's just one example, right? When it comes to other things, finances, I can't really take care of paying all the bills this month or from the next 6 months. Here's the checkbook. Handle it, right? Or even dealing with kids' issues. When your kid comes home and talks to you about something that happened at school and needs a resolution to a problem, send your child to your husband and see how he handles it. An important caveat is that you can't tell him how to handle it and then let him handle it. That's not called letting him handle it. Give it over to him and allow him to run that decision and that process. And I'd say there's a good chance that you'll be thrilled at not only how he handles the situation. I mean, you married a person that you trust, hopefully, but also I think you'll be thrilled at the freedom that you'll have in being able to give it over to somebody and not have to burden, shoulder all that burden yourself. So yeah, do weak men make masculine women? They do. But masculine women make weak men. So we both have a role to play here if we want to straighten out our marriages and straighten out our relationships. And we both can take control of the situation and make the changes that bring closeness, love, intimacy, and trust. And if you need any help with that, come visit me at davidfeldman.com or on Twitter at David Feldman. Take care and have a great marriage.